The ancient polar configuration, the most profound influence on early human history. A metamorphosing form in the sky, punctuated by instability, electrical outbursts, and episodic human terror. Our claim has been that the rise of the ancient civilizations themselves occurred in response to these events, under a compulsion to reenact celestial dramas that forever altered humanity's sense of identity. Here was the original source of the mythic archetypes and all of the mysterious symbols and magical rites passed down from generation to generation for thousands of years. The subject of this investigation does not allow for selective perception. Rather, it draws upon the totality of human experience through the myth-making epoch, an explosion of storytelling, inexplicable images carved on stone, and monumental construction, all declaring that towering gods formerly ruled the sky, though only for a time before they departed. And so we've called this historical narrative the one story told around the world. The story assures us that within human memory the sky changed radically, and thereby every critical turn in the story becomes an invitation to hear the ancient witnesses, look past the regional novelties, observe the human experience in its connection to the natural events that provoked all of the underlying patterns, the archetypes. But how could we draw reliable conclusions from transparently unreliable witnesses? The question is clear enough, but finding the answer requires that we follow ancient testimony back to its global convergence on critical details, even when those details seem too preposterous to believe. This simple requirement, fundamental to all reliable detective work, assures us that the archetypes could not be accidental or random. In unison, the archetypes express the coherent substructure of an extraordinary ancient experience. Of course, no single archetype on its own, even if hiding in plain sight, could give you reasons to believe a story. The truth is that virtually all archetypes are too preposterous to believe. Chaos monsters attacking the world, dying gods, heroes consorting with legendary goddesses, and mountains, towers, and stairways to heaven. And yet, for an investigator of this mystery, it is the preposterous details, coming down to us as a cross-cultural consensus, that offer a new understanding, with no room for compromise on fundamental ground rules. As the archetypes are brought to light, just two questions must be asked. Would this archetype be expected under the influence of things in our sky today? And would this archetype be expected under the ancient experience of the polar configuration? By posing just two questions, it becomes clear that the underlying integrity of the archetypes could not be accidental. The archetypes can be counted by the hundreds, and each stands in a predictable relationship to a universal substructure or cross-cultural agreement. And that is our advantage, specificity, with no ambiguity as to the answers anciently given. There is a full explanation for all of the mythic archetypes, but that explanation lies in planetary formations once visible to humans the world over. Planets close to Earth, embedded in spectacular plasma formations between these gathered bodies and animated by electric discharge. I've called these the acid tests because they don't allow us to simply invent explanations. In prior episodes of this series, we've alluded to many story elements in our reconstruction. An ancient sun god, the exemplary ruler of the sky before the present sun, a primeval sun, central sun, motionless sun, polar sun, all named in the early astronomical traditions as a planet, Saturn, celebrated as the original creator and king of the world, the mythic founder of the kingship rights. Saturn in a preposterous location at the celestial pole. Saturn bringing to humankind the legendary Golden Age. And so, too, the ancient memory of Saturn displaced or overthrown in an episode of world-altering catastrophe or cast down to the opposite end of the world axis. Don't believe in coincidence. The underlying integrity of this story could not be accidental. Of course, the story of Saturn is just the opening chapter. It's the totality of the ancient planetary connections that will drive the message home. That includes the vast range of images attached to the planet Venus. What natural experience could have inspired the global archetype of Venus as Mother Goddess? Why the mysterious identity of the goddess as animating eye, heart, or soul of the primeval sun? And what was meant by the goddess's departure from that elevated position, or the so-called terrible aspect of the goddess that followed? Such questions are only the beginning. And what of the planet Mars, so often said to have been born from the womb of the goddess, then earning a reputation as the pillar of the sky, and still later emerging as the cosmic warrior, even the divine weapon of the gods, the cosmic thunderbolt? Again, ask yourself whether any standard approaches to human history or to the origins of ancient thought has ever produced a compelling explanation for a single archetype, just one archetype amongst the hundreds that have now been identified. Under today's theoretical assumptions, a global accord would be inconceivable. But our objective in this series is to demonstrate the direct relationship of every archetype to the emergence and evolution of the polar configuration. No ambiguities and no rationalizations required. Though first impressions may see only a collection of random absurdities, the widespread patterns are not random. And the proof of this lies in hundreds of archetypes all lining up coherently to present a unified story under the most stringent demands of three-dimensional perspective. At each stage in the metamorphosis of the configuration, the changes in the relative positions of the interacting bodies require highly specific changes in appearance. In such acid tests, it is the demands of logical consistency and three-dimensional perspective that must guide us at each stage. And with this guidance, we can be confident that rational ground rules for assessing human testimony can direct us to definitive conclusions. We've said it before, and it bears repeating, that the first step in assessing the complex and extraordinary claims of this reconstruction is to be crystal clear as to the core details and their testable implications. This stylized form is the fulcrum of the reconstruction. From here we can look backwards and forwards to name critical events in the evolution of the configuration. We earlier named the planetary components. Saturn is the large sphere at the celestial pole, no rings at the time. Venus is the discharging star-like form on axis in the center of Saturn. And the smallest sphere, Mars, visually appearing within the sphere of Venus. We've called this a quasi-stable phase of an evolving or metamorphosing configuration. Episodic motions of Mars occurred along the axis, provoking streams of material alternately between Mars and Venus and between Mars and Earth. We also observed dramatic changes in the number of discharge streamers that stretched between Venus and Saturn. In Episode 4, we described the emergence of a triangular form from the dusty plasma medium and a subsequent explosive discharge, producing a vast cloud of luminous and chaotic debris in the space surrounding the aligned bodies. Later appeared the eight-rayed star, the centerpiece of our chronology, marking a tentative stabilization of the discharge activity. We've noted as well that a libration occurred along the axis, such that from Earth the different discharge configurations were seen alternately on axis and off axis. For any assessment of this reconstruction, the shifts in three-dimensional vantage point will be essential. In the early phases of the configuration, the interplanetary medium prevented observation of the Sun as a discrete sphere, though the Sun's lighting effects on the configuration become quite clear with the appearance of the crescent on Saturn. This meant not only a reduction in the surrounding dusty plasma medium, but a more clearly defined cycle of day and night. At the polar location, the crescent visually revolved around the polar center with the rotation of the Earth in a daily cycle of dimming and brightening. Closely associated with the appearance of this turning crescent was the descent of material from Mars. The first effect was a luminous spike reaching earthward. As Mars moved closer to the Earth, the downward stream of material extended well below the visible sphere of Saturn, eventually connecting with the circumpolar region of the Earth. It seems that over time, the eightfold Venus discharge was compressed into just 4 directional streamers, expanding across the face of Saturn. This phase seems to have merged insensibly with another, as a dusty plasma column between Mars and Venus exhibited a conical form when seen slightly off-axis, while appearing as a bright equatorial band around Mars when viewed on-axis. Metamorphosis continued with the progressive displacement of Venus and Mars from their axial positions, the plasma stream between the two bodies taking on a spiraling form. As we'll see in due course, with continued displacement, the spiraling plasma stream between Mars and Venus gave way to a chaotic, undulating appearance as the configuration itself grew catastrophically unstable. The violent episodes that followed marked the most terrifying events in all of human history. The disastrous interlude between the dismemberment of the configuration and a spectacular phase of reconstruction.